Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about drawing in Glyphs. It's a little bit different than some of the other drawing softwares we're used to, so we'll talk about the fundamentals in this video and then some pro tips that will help you out in some later videos. First, let's take a look at the drawing panel. When we open up a letter form, so an individual letter form, at the top here you'll see all of our drawing tools. We have a point selection tool similar to what we're used to, a pen tool, which we should be pretty familiar with, a rectangle tool and really shape tool, so rectangles and circles, a rotate tool, a typing tool, and a hand tool. So let's talk about each in turn. First, the rectangle tool. When I draw a rectangle, just like anything else, I'm going to draw it in there, and Glyphs will give me this weird, crazy little panel, this filled in shape. Now it's showing me what that filled space is. Some things that I'm going to do is if I tap and hold my space bar, you can see what this looks like, which of course it hasn't changed much. But in this bottom left corner, we can also pull up a preview down here so we can see what we're working with. If I use the circle tool as well, so my circle tool, I can draw any sort of ellipse that I want, similar to Illustrator if you're familiar drawing in there. If you hold Shift, it'll perfectly scale this, so this is now a perfect circle. And just like that, we've got two shapes on our artboard. It has a little bounding box here, but when it doesn't have our rotating handles, if we want to rotate a shape, we can select the rotate tool up here, and then it'll rotate it, but based on that origin. So if we don't want to rotate based off of the origin, we can go over here to the right, select a certain degree amount, maybe I'll say 45, and then the left arrow here for counterclockwise, and the right arrow there for clockwise. You can see when I click it either way that my shape is now rotating to the left and to the right. You'll also notice that these shapes have come up with different colors. So Glyphs really likes to know the order of our paths. So here you'll see a number 1, and down there you'll see a number 2. When Glyphs is showing us these, it's telling us what order the paths are in, which translates to how other softwares go about drawing their letter forms. Time for a quick break in the content to ask if you're enjoying what you're watching and seeing, to please subscribe to the channel because that's the best way to support what's going on this channel. If you're already subscribed, be sure to like the video, comment on it, and share it with somebody new. All right, back to the action. With my selection tool, I can grab my point selection tool out here and click anywhere outside of these shapes to deselect them. I can zoom out, zoom in to see what's going on. I can select a point. So this is a point here, and that's a point there. But of course, there are some differences between this point over here and that one right there. You'll notice this point here is a blue square, and that's telling us that it's a corner piece. So this is a corner, and this point over here is a green circle. It's telling us that that's a curve. Now when we draw our letter forms, you'll notice the way that Glyphs automatically drew these curves, with a point at the very top, the very bottom, the very left, and the very right. When we draw our own curves, we'll want to keep our paths similarly structured so that they're perpendicular. When we get into drawing paths, and if we're doing something more like this, then our shapes end up all over the place, and it's never going to be any good for us. So we're going to just Command Z our way through this back to those perfect circles. I can also double click on a path and it'll select it for me. Then grabbing an anchor, I can move it wherever I want. Anywhere like this, and if I hold Shift, it'll move it into a perfect line. Now I'm going to put this circle in there and say that I imagine this being a capital O, but it doesn't render like a capital O. When I'm looking at it here, I say, oh yeah, sure, that should work. But when I hold my space bar down or look at my preview down here at the bottom, it's not working quite right. What I ought to do is select these paths with that selection tool, go up to Path, and we'll correct our path direction. Right now, before we do that, you'll notice that number 1 has this little blue triangle on it that faces that way, and number 2 has a green triangle that faces this way. Glyphs is telling us that our path is running this direction, so the computer is drawing it in that sort of order. And this shape is drawing it in this order, starting from point to handle, handle to point, point to handle, so on and so forth, all the way around. With these all selected, if I choose my path and to correct my path direction, you'll notice it cuts it out. So the shape changed color here to look like it's cut out. It changed in our demo as well, and if I hold down the space bar, it also changes. Those are sort of the fundamentals of how that might work. It also gets tricky when we start to use something like our pen tool. So our pen tool up here, if we use our pen tool, it works just like the pen tool in Illustrator. Say I want to have a figurine in the middle of this shape. I can click and drag and you'll see that I get a point and a handle. I'm still holding my mouse click down. I'm almost always going to hold shift when I draw these points so that when I'm working on this, I get these perfect perpendicular points and handle relationships. Remember, we just talked about this. This is the way we're going to draw good paths. But we can do whatever we want and be crazy for a minute and then connect back to whatever kind of crazy shape this is. Now, eventually, if we move that, these handles are locked. This is the difference between the green points and the blue ones. If I double click on this green one out here, you'll notice it can change from a green point to a blue point, and double click to change it back. What that does is basically lock that anchor. So let's say I wanted to draw something that had a square corner. Let's say I want a square corner down here at this point. If I go and double click this, it'll change to a blue point. And now the handles are separate, which will allow me to move this and make it a nice square piece. And that'll be the difference when we start to work on these points, is that the green ones are connected and the blue ones are not. That's the difference between a curve and a square point. Finally, as we're drawing these things and we're working through them, if you draw a letter form here, when you go back to your sort of home page, you can see now A is like this weird globe cut out on a piece of paper with, I don't know, the state of Michigan maybe right there. But our letter forms will live in this panel. And now that we've drawn something in that A file, it'll show up there. So those are the basics of drawing, or at least how to draw in Glyphs. In our next video, we'll talk you through some pro tips and how to get the most out of our Glyphs drawing as we go through our alphabet. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you were able to gain something along the way, even if it's just a hotkey or how to move some points around that is different than what you may have otherwise known. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos coming out every single week, and comment or tag or share it with some other designers who you think would design some awesome fonts.